And welcome once again to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. Joining me as always, Juan Zarate. He's our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you.
Bob, great to see you.
So we talk about Ukraine often because that really is kind of like the number one flashpoint. Right. What's going on there now?
Well, you have a new round of sanctions imposed by the U.S. Treasury, U.S. government, and the European Union. This is an attempt to name additional figures. The U.S. list has 7 additional individuals, some Russian officials, some business folks, 17 additional entities, companies ranging from a soft drink company to construction and investment companies, really an attempt to signal to the markets that there should be caution in doing business with Russia. But what you didn't see, Bob, is a full-throated financial campaign unleashed. And I think that's what you've started to hear from critics, from Congress, folks who want to see sector-wide sanctions imposed on Russia, going after their oil and gas sector, for example, or banking sector, or even their mining or defense industries. That has not been the administration's approach to date. They want to keep the sanctions as cohesive as possible with Europe. And they also, I think, don't want to use the sanctions as a provocative excuse for Putin to do anything further. I think there's some challenges with that approach, but that's what's happened today.
Is there any evidence so far, though, that the sanctions are working? Because Putin doesn't seem to be backing off at all.
No, President Obama in some ways has already admitted this. There's no way that the sanctions, at least short-term, are going to impact what's happened in Crimea, the annexation. That's happened.
That's over.
It's a fait accompli. The question is, does this deter Russian provocations and fomenting of instability in the Ukraine? You've seen Secretary Kerry talk openly, and the president too, of Russian involvement with the pro-Russian militias in the east. We're moving toward an election later in May in Kiev, and so it doesn't seem that Russian provocations activities, to include their troops on the border, have been affected by any of this. And that's the reality of these measures. These measures can impose costs on the Russian economy, but they're going to be mid and longer term, and it's not clear that it's affecting the calculus in the Kremlin.
So to be fair, these are more than just window dressing. These do have some real bite, but they don't go, in your opinion, far enough?
Right. I think they're sort of the middle ground of the criticism you hear. You hear some saying, look, these are not anything, right? They're being poo-pooed. That's certainly not right, because what this is creating is instability in the markets. The naming, for example, of Igor Sechin, who runs Rosneft, one of the big oil companies in Russia, that's created a lot of turmoil, because the question is, if this individual is sanctioned, can we do business with his company? That's a big question for the major oil companies in the West. Same thing with Gennady Timchenko and others who've been named, who have all sorts of interests in the West. So it really does begin to affect the Russian economy at a time when it's weak. That said, it's not aggressive enough for many, because it doesn't name more companies, it doesn't name more banks, and it certainly isn't the sector-wide type trade embargoes that the president has threatened but not yet unleashed.
So to wrap this up then, if you had to really drop the hammer, I mean, if you really want to make this hurt and really try to affect change, what has to happen? I
think you do 2 things. I think you do a sector-wide approach. You say, look, there should be an embargo in the U.S., in Europe, on any activities with the Russian defense industry. These are the companies that are dealing, for example, with Syria and Iran. We're going to take the financial gloves off with any Russian entity that's engaged in sanctions evasion, money laundering, organized crime, dealing with Syria, North Korea, Belarus. We're going to name banks, companies, individuals, and we're going to go after Putin's assets. We're going to say openly, we're going to hunt the assets of a kleptocracy, and we're going to go find where Putin and his allies are hosting that money, and we're going to go after it. That would be a full-throated campaign. The challenge with that is Europe wouldn't be fully on board, and it would take a policy decision in Washington that we're going to be aggressive with Russia.
Have to watch that one as always. Juan, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks to you for watching Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. We'll see you next time.